Since 1972, the McIlvaney Financial Group has been a conservative, contrarian investment firm. With that mindset, they have created a multifaceted approach to portfolio management, offering a wide array of services including wealth management, a unique short fund, hedging through precious metals, and excellent educational resources. We have had David McIlvaney on our show multiple times because we respect his outlook, viewpoints, and recommendations. You really need to let them give you a much better understanding of what true portfolio diversification is. Just go to McIlvaney.com/Main Street, with Main Street all spelled out, to get introduced and to garner free information. Again, that's McIlvaney.com/Main Street to schedule your free 20-minute consulting session. Hi everyone, this is Jason Burack of Wall Street for Main Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street for Main Street podcast interview. Today's special guest is a first-time guest. I'm friends with him in real life. He is going to use a pen name though. It's Derek Bronson of Markets with Bronson. So Derek, my listeners are probably not familiar with you. Why don't you tell our listeners your background first?
Absolutely. Thanks, Jason, for having me on. It's an absolute pleasure. I have a bachelor's and master's both in finance, and I've been working in the private equity industry for about 10 years now. I've done a lot of financial modeling, a lot of data collection and analytics, and a lot of just general finance and analysis. I've seen way too many financial statements, way more than I would have cared to admit.
I know the feeling, man. I've worked in the financial industry off and on for a long time too, with different jobs. But yeah, I've looked at way too many bad mining companies. So, but let's talk about what you told me, about the private equity industry, because that'll echo some of the bubbles that we're having. You told me about the quality of deals in private equity. You've noticed lately that the firms you work at, that they're not doing as strong in deals lately.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's systemic really to the whole industry. We look at the whole market, it's just so richly valued right now. Pretty much these large PE firms who have large pension funds and endowments who are making commitments to their funds, they have a choice to either sit on literally billions of dry powder, which the investors don't really like, because they're like, hey, what are you doing with our capital? We've kind of got it on hold here for you, and you're not really doing anything with it. And so it's kind of forcing everyone's hand to just invest in anything and everything really that has some semblance of yield. It's really a hunt for yield.
Do you think this has to do then with the central banks coordinating and manipulating interest rates down with financial repression, and this is like an effect then of the central bank policy then of financial repression and manipulating interest rates, how people are desperate for chasing yield and willing to do bad deals?
Oh, Jason, without a doubt. It's what happens when you do over $4 trillion in unsterilized bond purchases. You can't just print money and expect nothing bad to happen. Currency is the lifeblood of an economy, and when you pervert that, you can see dire consequences eventually down the road. And I think we're seeing that in this hunt for yield, as I mentioned.
Yeah, and to add to your points there, we're also seeing it in the resource industry. As you guys know, I follow the royalty and streaming industry very closely, not just Sandstorm Gold, but also Silver Wheaton, Franco-Nevada, those guys. You have Franco-Nevada, who normally likes only doing gold and silver deals. They're now willing to do oil and gas deals because normally when you run the financial numbers, Derek, and you've done more of these than I have, you look at internal rate of return on a deal. And on the Sandstorm Gold conference call last week, they publicly disclosed that a lot of new entrants in the industry, so these are pension funds desperate for capital that are starting to get into royalty and streaming deals. They don't have as much experience, maybe not as astute. And then also private equity entrants who are not as experienced doing royalty and streaming deals, but maybe they've done private equity in a lot of other industries. They've been doing deals now, Derek, for over $100 million in the resource industry for royalty and streaming deals with 5% internal rate of return or less. The Sandstorm Gold conference call, they even said that a couple of the latest pretty large deals are for 1%, 0% or negative IRR deals. So what in financial terms there, what does that exactly mean?
Jason, they're looking under every rock. Really, they're kicking all the tires. They're trying to find anything that smells like a deal, because the deal marketplace is so competitive right now. And it blows my mind that they're willing to go that low, especially because in private equity, there's something called a hurdle rate. Basically, it's usually standard 8%. So meaning you don't get to take carried interest. You get 20% of the profits above that you earn above that 8% hurdle rate. So them going in knowingly going to get below 5% or even negative, as you said, that blows my mind. They're basically writing off carried interest on that deal, and just I guess they're just praying for the management fees to keep flowing. So that's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, and for perspective out there for our listeners who are not familiar, rather than the complicated terms like internal rate of return, that's literally taking out $100 million or $200 million, and you're risking that capital on a deal with a counterparty and could go wrong, and your upside in that deal, Derek, might only be 1% of all that money. So you're risking that huge chunk of capital for 1%. It's kind of mind-boggling that people would be willing to take that kind of risk for that low of a reward.
Oh, it's absolutely mind-boggling to me, but it's such a competitive environment that, who knows where we go from here.
Well, let's transition now. You told me that you want to talk specifically about the Seth Rich case, Comey and Trump. So what thoughts do you have on the Seth Rich case? Because it's obviously all over the news right now.
Yeah, so right when I saw Comey got fired a while ago, I had this feeling that mainstream media headlines were about to start getting juicier, and that we would all look back on that moment when Comey got fired as kind of like a milestone. So Seth Rich is finally being discussed in the news. I think it was Fox 5 that had Rod Wheeler on discussing that, Seth probably was in communication with WikiLeaks and that he can't locate the laptop. He doesn't know if it's with DC police or FBI, and he says his source says that DC police told him to stand down. And it's just, it's really, the circumstances are quite suspicious. The WikiLeaks emails dropping 12 days after Seth Rich was murdered, and he was shot in the back, and they were saying it was a robbery, but none of his valuables were taken. And even more ridiculous, 12 minutes after the Seth Rich story dropped on Fox, the Washington Compost dropped the story about Trump leaking national security intel to Russia. So I just think it's really funny how big headlines are coming in pairs these days. So it's kind of like the swamp dwellers are just creating this story to get the focus off Seth Rich. That's kind of how it appears to me. And I think, even one of Podesta's emails said that they should make an example out of a suspected leaker. And guess who the Washington Post just hired? None other than Mr. Podesta. So I think we see a pattern here. So it's also hilarious how Al Green was ranting about impeaching Trump. I clicked the link through Zero Hedge and was watching it through there, and I took a gander at some of the comments below the video, and I died laughing when I saw one of the comments was that someone said he looked like the Geico caveman because he has this big scraggly beard. I lost it.
Well, welcome to dystopia, buddy. I mean, it seems like everything's on a dual track. Things are just divergence here. So, they keep doubling, the mainstream media just keeps doubling down on this Trump-Russia thing out of desperation. I really think, Derek, since Trump won the election, even before the inauguration, I think I was telling you about this at dinner, that like the mainstream media was really just trying to impeach him. That was going to be the goal, and that they were going to try to figure out whatever they could get on him. There's been so many leaks already throughout the Trump administration. I think one of the reasons he's gone down to Mar-a-Lago in Florida is to reduce the amount of leaks because almost all the White House staffers are hardcore Democrats, the career government bureaucrat, never Trumper people. And they're basically committing treason because they're leaking top secret or classified information. And, when Comey was still there, they didn't have to worry about going to prison for it.
Yeah, absolutely. You know how we have Rolling Thunder coming through D.C. here next weekend with all the bikers on their motorcycles? I think if they really try and impeach him, that there's going to be a whole different kind of Rolling Thunder coming through town. So it would be really quite a spectacle, I believe. And in terms of looking at that from a market standpoint, yesterday we saw the VIX spike 46% up for the day, and The Dow and S&P were both down 180 basis points. I believe it was the largest year-to-date loss. And I have a theory. I think this turmoil was caused by the swamp creatures who are in control of the markets, be it the infamous plunge protection team or the Fed or some other proxy. I don't know who, and I obviously can't prove it. It's just a working theory. But I think they did this for two reasons. I think, one, they were sending a signal to the Trump administration and his allies, for lack of a better word, that if they continue to pursue the Seth Rich investigation, that they can crash the markets at will anytime they want. And two, I think this also gives them a convenient way to blame Trump for the markets going down. Because, if the markets go down and then all of a sudden you see all the news headlines that they control saying Trump made the markets go down, you're conditioning people to all the casual observers are being conditioned to think Trump is bad. So that's what are your thoughts on that?
Well, we know before the election happened that Trump used rhetoric to get elected, that he was saying, the stock market's a bubble, I'm going to fire Janet Yellen. He's not allowed to fire Janet Yellen, by the way. But he said he was going to fire her. He said the Fed manipulates interest rates. It's, screwing over everyone. And now, he's done a total 180. Now that he's in office, he's taking all this credit. So it's a dangerous game he's playing. The guy has a big ego. I think, he's done a few good things like eliminate TPP. Although now, he's kind of backtracked on that because he's saying he's a nationalist and a globalist. It's confusing to me what exactly that means. He didn't remove NAFTA. I guess he got talked out of that, but he did put in a pro-constitutional judge, so that's good. And the other thing that he's done recently is Comey. So I think, me, so I've been screaming for months now that Comey should have been fired after all the WikiLeaks Podesta emails and all the things we've heard about Comey. I mean, even looking into Comey's background, Derek, I don't even know how he got the fucking job in the first place. I don't even know how he got the FBI director job in the first place, considering, the dirty deeds he did for HSBC Bank to get them off of criminal drug laundering, money laundering charges for drug cartels in billions of dollars.
I'm with you, Jason. It's almost like we've been shifted into a parallel universe or something.
Well, yeah, it's almost like they've intentionally put in the worst criminals in the government bureaucrats intentionally with control files so that they can get whatever crimes they want done with. If little guys or small business owners or medium-sized business owners did any little crime at all, we'd be in prison for 10 years or longer. And
absolutely.
The big power players and the big corporations, they can commit whatever they want, carte blanche, and all they have to do is write a tiny little fine and don't have to worry about any major repercussions.
Well, let's hope that this letting go of Comey really is the turning point we hope it is. But hey, let's pivot to Canada. Have you seen what's going on up there?
Yeah, I was actually in Canada. I was in Toronto in September of last year. And I had been, for comparison's sake, I'd been in Toronto too in 2014. And I noticed in 2014, Derek, a lot of, these really high-end luxury condo buildings that were being high-rise stuff that were being built. But when I went back last year, it was even worse.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they're in a hyper bubble right now compared to our bubble here in the U.S. It's crazy. And really big news that isn't really being reported on is Home Capital Group in Canada. It's a non-bank mortgage lender. They essentially had a digital bank run happen to them over the past few weeks. I think 94+% of deposits rushed out. They had to get a $2 billion cash injection from the healthcare workers' pension in Canada. I think with rates going up to 22%, that's pretty punitive. And also, I think they've already burned half of that, and they just sold $1 billion more in a chunk of mortgages they have on their books at undisclosed terms. So, I bet you they took a haircut on that. People are starting to call it Home No Capital Group. So it's absolutely crazy. And Equitable, which is pretty much the other large non-bank lender, is also just as it's cascading over to their stock price too. So it's looking pretty dicey up there.
Do you think this reminds you of what happened in 2006 and 7 with some of the subprime companies? How, we started to see, the periphery, the edges of the housing bubble. Remember Ben Bernanke and other people were like, oh, subprime is contained. It's not going to go into the whole entire housing market. It's only going to be small percentage. Do you think that's kind of how it's playing out in Canada?
Oh, absolutely. And, you look at Mike Maloney, he actually just posted a video on YouTube the other day saying that exact same thing, how you can just replace it with, U.S. institution names, and it's the exact same situation. By the way, that was a great YouTube video. You should check that out if you haven't seen it yet. He's basically calling the market top right now.
And to add to your points there, Janet Yellen, I found this out from Danielle DiMartino Booth. Janet Yellen was president of the San Francisco Federal Reserve. She totally missed the housing bubble. So
wow.
she was actually writing papers and giving speeches talking about how good the economy was and how good the housing market was in her region while, subprime was totally collapsing back then.
Oh, man. Yeah, that's nuts.
There was a lot of capital that came into Canada from China, and it's gone into the real estate market, and it's probably led to a lot of speculation and a lot of expectations of kind of never-ending increases in prices and never-ending demand for luxury condos and new homes and more land and things like that. The Chinese. People say, oh, the Federal Reserve is the worst. Well, China, just since 2008, Derek, China's created 28 trillion RMB worth of, money and credit into their system. And that money doesn't stay there. That money a lot of it's leaked out of the country as well.
Oh, yeah. And you saw that tax they implemented on vacant homes in Canada, I think. I think it was like 15% a year if your home's not occupied or something really punitive like that.
Yeah, it's Vancouver.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, because there was a documentary and it was embarrassing. I saw a documentary maybe 6 months ago about it. Yeah, and there was maybe one lady who had lived there for most of her adult life on that street, and she said all the other homes on the street, it was an older neighborhood of Vancouver, and she said all the other houses in the neighborhood were empty, and they had been paid for like all cash by Chinese investors who some of them hadn't even gone to visit the property. They just paid all cash. They just said, "Oh, there's a house there. Oh, here's the cash."
You're kidding.
Yep, sight unseen, which is a big red flag for bubbles, I guess, too.
That's absurd. Man. But yeah, have you heard about this, changing subjects a little bit, have you heard about this ransomware that's been floating around?
I haven't followed the story that closely, but there's been more than 70 countries affected, and are they going to blame the Russians again, or are the North Koreans taking credit? There's a lot of rumors floating around out there.
The WannaCry Eternal Blue ransomware variant. I think they just made a second variant of it because someone found out how to kind of slow it down or stop the first version. And, it's infiltrating hospitals and banks and universities and corporations and so on. It's pretty pervasive. And it's encrypting their software and files, demanding payment in Bitcoin if they want to see the files again. My theory is I think this was orchestrated by the deep state. And in their eyes, I think this move kills two birds. So last I heard, they're trying to blame this on North Korea. You guessed it. And likely so the military-industrial complex can use that as part of their rationale to go to war with them. And also,
they can use this as rationale to introduce
legislation to ban Bitcoin. So it's kind of like a win-win for them, for the deep state, in my opinion.
That's very interesting because I had heard that the hackers were demanding Bitcoin with the ransomware, but the mainstream media news was lying and saying it wasn't Bitcoin that there were in the demands. So it's very interesting, but they can't fully. I've researched Bitcoin a lot, and I've been to a Bitcoin conference recently. They can't totally ban Bitcoin because you can't shut down the blockchain without shutting down the internet. All you can really do, though, is you can hurt the on-ramps and the off-ramps, which are the Bitcoin exchanges. So, you can tax them or shut down the exchanges in theory, but, then the Bitcoin exchanges will just go to other countries. So this would have to be like a coordinated effort then, kind of like, Piketty, the neo-Marxist guy who wrote in his book like last year, the year before, that like all governments have to unite to stop tax dodgers and everyone has to enforce a global wealth tax, it would kind of be like that, where every government would have to unite then and enforce the internet to shut down Bitcoin exchanges or tax them or things. So I don't really see that. They can't fully stop Bitcoin. They can try to tax it and stuff, but they can't totally stop it. Well, they can manipulate it though. Did you hear what the CME group was talking about? Supposedly the CME group has filed for patents now to create a Bitcoin futures exchange, so they can start trading Bitcoin derivatives. And we all know what happens when you start trading, crazy amounts of derivatives with something. Look at the oil markets and manipulation there. Look at gold and silver market with the manipulation. A lot of the large investment banks and Goldman Sachs have gotten, over the years, crazy amounts of fines for manipulating commodities markets.
Yeah, but all that being said, I don't think that they are smart enough to realize how hard it is to shut down Bitcoin. So it won't stop them from trying, in my opinion. But I know you've heard of Cliff High, Jason.
Yes.
But I don't think you follow him quite as closely as I do. I think. And for your viewers, basically he data mines the internet to try and get the general sentiment of the people and see what they're saying on websites and social media. And he's been able to make absolutely absurdly accurate calls of peaks and troughs of Bitcoin price, and with very good timing accuracy as well. He basically called that it would hit parity with gold in the beginning of 2017, which it did right on the 3rd of January. And he predicted it would pull back to around $888, and it went down to 800. So, in my opinion, close enough. That's a pretty darn good forecast. And then his special cryptocurrency report a month or two ago said that Bitcoin will hit the all-time high of gold in the coming months, and then pull back $400 or $500. And just before this podcast with you, I checked, and Bitcoin's trading right around $1,900. So I mean, if his Webbot report is right, we could see it pull back $400 or $500. And that would really correlate with any potential legislation that they try and introduce in the near future. So I just see it playing out just like Cliff High thinks it will.
Well, I just sold all my Ethereum coins last week. I made big bucks, big percentage gains, and pretty good amount of money on speculation of Ethereum coins. One of my listeners, I heard it on Lewis's channel, interviewed one of my listeners who listened to me interviewing David Seaman before he became famous with Pedogate and Pizzagate. When he was just covering gold, silver, Bitcoin, and cryptocurrencies.
Oh, yeah. I heard that.
Yeah, and so Dave, I think Ethereum was like $9 to $10 a coin back then in early 2016. And so I bought some as a speculation back then. I guess some of my other listeners did. And one of my listeners made enough money. He bought a car with the profits, so a sports car.
Yeah. I heard him say he bought a 2002 Mustang on Lewis's subscriber interview series.
Yeah, not bad, but yeah, I mean there's been opportunities to trade Bitcoin in and out. Like when Bitcoin hit 1,200 really early this year, it was predictable there would be a pullback because how quickly it rushed up. I think I did a video saying it was time to take some gains, and then it bottomed out. You could see those on the charts. I don't think Bitcoin it's not manipulated at all compared to gold and silver and some of the other commodities markets. So Bitcoin is with the technical analysis and the charts, it's a lot easier to predict. Although now, Derek, we're in uncharted territory with Bitcoin because Bitcoin is making new all-time highs. So what I've learned with trading and technical analysis, and this is from a very experienced hedge fund trader, is he said take the all-time high of something that's in new uncharted territory and put like a 33% Fibonacci move up on it, and then expect after it breaks like higher than that, maybe above 2,000 Bitcoin, for a another big correction after that. So things kind of move then in Fibonacci movements.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, yeah, Cliff High said it'll pull back and then shoot to 2,300, I think was his next target.
Yeah, so we could have a correction where Bitcoin goes to well above 2,000, maybe even 2,300 or 2,500. Very quickly, and then it's the buying pressure starts to slow down, and then Bitcoin could collapse in half then to 1,200 and build a base for a while. That I could see that happening as well, because
right.
in very hot markets, things like that can happen. What people don't realize in bull markets is that bull markets, the bull throws off a lot of the people riding the bull up. So it could go up very violently. Sometimes the saying is like that it goes up like an escalator and down like an elevator, but it can also, in the case of Bitcoin, go up very rapidly, almost parabolic on the chart. But when it does that normally in finance, when you have a parabolic move on the chart without corrections, you're going to see a big correction then. And it has to build a base.
Yeah, that makes sense. Definitely makes sense.
Well, what do you want to talk about next, Derek?
I was thinking, what are your thoughts on Macaroon or Macron or whatever his name is?
Oh my God. Well, I think things are going to get a lot worse in France before they get better. So, I was listening on Real Vision TV to this French investor, and he was basically saying he didn't think Le Pen would win this election. And obviously the interview on Real Vision was before the election happened, so he was right about that. But he said that in 5 years from now, he was like, things will have built up even more. So whichever candidate runs on the similar policies to Le Pen would almost definitely win then 5 years from now, because things would get even worse.
I definitely agree with that. I can't believe he won in the first place. And, either the French people aren't awake enough to their own detriment, or the election was rigged somehow, or both. And I think I remember somewhere that a subset of folks in France in a region that favored Macaroon were sent 2 ballots instead of 1, allowing them to vote for him twice. And what's even more alarming is that hackers dumped financial documents detailing Macaroon's offshore bank accounts, and the French government actually told the media not to report to the people who are about to vote about this information. And I just think that's absurd. I think it's extremely disturbing.
Yeah, it's total bullshit and extremely dangerous. And did you hear they're suing Jack Posobiec because he retweeted WikiLeaks, and he had either the most or the second most retweets from the WikiLeaks article. So they're saying you're an American who interfered with our election, and they're suing him now. The French government. So he's American. It's totally ridiculous.
Oh my gosh. Welcome to dystopia, right, Jason?
Exactly. Well, the other thing about Macron, I mean, he's a Rothschild banker. There's a lot of weird things about Macron's background. Maybe the French don't see him as weird, but as an American, I see them as weird. So he's a Rothschild banker. He's very young. He had that money offshore, which is a huge red flag, that he's a tax dodging criminal, because, the French have such high taxes there. But the other thing is, he's his new wife is claiming, who's like much older than him. I think she's 64, 65 now, and he's like 36 or 37. So he was only 15 or 16. He was a student in her class, and she was married with children when they met. And they're claiming that it wasn't a sexual relationship when he was 15 or 16. But I don't think I believe them, man. So, the French think it's romantic that a much older woman, seduces a 15 or 16-year-old boy. I would call it something else, let's just say.
Leave it to the French, right? That's funny.
Yeah.
Well, Jason, what keeps you up at night the most?
Well, nothing anymore. I take sleeping pills, so.
Just you punted on the natural way. Just too much going on out there, huh?
Yeah, I take natural sleeping aids. So really nothing keeps me up at night too much anymore. But when I'm awake, I've tried to hedge out the portfolio, not from free markets, but from evil, greedy central bankers and evil, greedy, corrupt politicians. Trying to change the rules on us. That's what pisses me off the most. Is that you and me could do all this research, and then here's new rules. There's a new capital gains tax on Bitcoin. There's new capital gains windfall profits taxes on gold and silver.
Right.
That's what would piss me off the most.
I agree completely. Yeah. For me, it's not just one thing on my end. I feel like right now we're surrounded by black swans, honestly. And
they're not black swans then.
I don't know, man. I feel like who knows what it could be. I guess all we need is one, right? Italian banks. There's something called a Texas ratio, and that's basically like the bad loans on their books divided by their liquid assets, and almost every bank in Italy has a Texas ratio of 100% or more. And 24 of them have one over 200%. So it's looking pretty dicey over there, and all major banks globally have tens of trillions of notional derivatives on their books, and they don't have to report these figures on their balance sheets, if they offset one another. But if they had to report their gross amounts, it would be just huge amounts of paper wealth. And the EU is trying to impose even more austerity on Greece, on the Greek people. I didn't know there were any more pensions left to cut. The policemen down there are even rioting with the people now. I saw a video earlier today. Venezuela, people are eating their street animals, and there's crazy hyperinflation. And now I'm hearing that soldiers are defecting and marching with the people. And the CME group is resigning from the silver fix. I'm sure you've heard, because they know there's going to be a big problem someday because of all the stop busters over at HSBC and Deutsche Bank and so on. And, U.S. is posturing against North Korea, and Puerto Rico is still in default. I guess they're trying to restructure. Mexico is having some gasoline riots, and they hiked the gas tax by 20%. And I think at one point the cartels were burning down American gas stations in Mexico as an FU to both Donald and the gas tax. And student loan defaults are rising, and I heard the system for collecting on student loans in default was just frozen, so it's causing a lot of confusion right now. And students were calling, asking why their money wasn't being taken out of their accounts. And both subprime and prime auto loan defaults are rising. Huge amounts of vehicle leases are ending, and basically there's a flood of auto inventory just flooding the markets. And so the automakers are having to offer absurd incentives on their inventory. So I'm just waiting until an F-150 Raptor is half the price so I can jump on that. And Macy's is getting shredded along with the rest of retail, and China and Russia appear to be in the process of moving on bilateral trade that circumvents the dollar. And, the U.S., we just barely avoided a government shutdown, and we have until September. Donald even tweeted, the government needs a good shutdown. So really, look, I mean, after all of that, who wants to buy? Raise your hand. Who wants to buy the S&P?
I think, if they're going to create money out of thin air, if the Swiss central bank is, in the past they ran, the euro peg and created all these extra currency units, that's what they were going to go buy. So you have all these countries, trying to gain a trade advantage, manipulating their currencies and exchange rates, and then they create all these excess currency units. So I think it's, these central banks because they've created extra currency out of thin air, and they're the ones going in and buying a lot of that those assets that you said, the stocks, and they're indiscriminately buying them.
Yeah. Oh man, it's the Wild West out there.
So that list you just named, that's what keeps you up at night, or do you have other?
Yep. No, that was pretty comprehensive, but I'll let you know if anything else hits my radar.
I mean, I've said this before. You've heard this. I mean, everything is a giant clusterfuck or fustercluck.
Yeah.
The people don't want me to curse fustercluck. Okay, and instead of a black swan, because I've heard so many people use it, I think the better analogy is it's one giant global economic minefield, right? So if you step on one mine, it could be a chain reaction that blows up the other mines.
Yeah, it's almost like there are asset bubbles propping up other asset bubbles.
Well, this is what happens with debt-based fiat currency, and central banks can literally create currency unit. They don't even have to print the money anymore. They can just do it on a keyboard. They could do currency swaps. They don't have to put them on their balance sheet. They could put currency swaps on their balance sheet. That's probably why the European banks haven't collapsed yet. We've had a few European banks nationalized. There was one big Italian bank. I can't remember if you named it or not. Monte dei Paschi, right? And
yeah, it's the oldest bank in the world, I think.
Yeah, and the Ukraine's largest bank was nationalized too. So, and Deutsche Bank, we know Deutsche Bank has had a huge derivatives problem, and they sold some of their derivatives book to Citibank. But I think, Deutsche Bank has been bailed out secretly too as well. The oil market is a disaster waiting to happen. Let me look at the oil price right now. Pull up oilprice.com really quick. We're at 49 and change WTI, $52.51 Brent. If the oil price, Derek, goes another $10 lower, we are looking at some massive defaults. But what worries me then, is even if these oil companies default, technically, I mean, the banks or the central bankers or the politicians or the bureaucrats could just say, oh, don't declare it a default. Just figure out how to raise them more capital or change the rules. So then it's a secret bailout then, because if you're insolvent, right, but the bankers won't call in the loans, it's basically a bailout.
Yeah. I mean, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it's probably a duck.
Yeah, so we have a situation now where I think like so many of these different asset markets and industries are either being bailed out already through different measures, or so many fires are being put out behind the scenes. I mean, we occasionally hear about some of them on Zero Hedge, but we're in really unprecedented times because, the crazy libertarians are like, everything should have crashed already. Gold should be over 10,000. Silver should be at over 500 already. Well, in this environment, Derek, where people can change the rules like this and, the markets are manipulated and there's all this paper, it's going to be very difficult to have a metals market like that and free market forces when they can, if we get prices like that, there's nothing to stop the people in power unless we vote them out or pitchforks from taxing us and taking away our gains. So we could be right doing this research and then they could still screw us over.
Right. That's kind of why I keep coming back to this Comey thing, and I really do think that the political situation here in the U.S. might be kind of that catalyst that the libertarians are kind of waiting for, I think, because if the everyday citizen truly does find out just how corrupt the system was under the prior administration, and arguably it hasn't been drained, so it is still, I really do think that people will have a big sanity check and a rude awakening. And I think that might be kind of what we're looking for. It looks like we're headed down that road, with all this back and forth, news story versus news story that we're seeing.
I think this news story divergence, with the mainstream media versus the alternative media, I think, it's showing how deeply divided the country is. That, yes, there are people who would be outraged at the amount of corruption if they actually found out the truth. But there's also a very large percentage of Americans, Derek, who don't know and don't care. And I don't know about you, but I know people who have 2 or 3 degrees and they believe everything that the New York Times, the Washington Post, MSNBC, CNN, all those guys put on air, because they're like, oh, they did great research. They have, a track record and credibility. I won't question them. I mean, right. I can't tell you how many people I've heard that from and how many trolls on Twitter I've had to block tell me that Donald Trump is a Russian spy. I blocked, last week, Derek, I blocked 24 people because I replied to Edward Snowden on his Twitter handle, and I just got attacked by Democrats relentlessly for a few days.
Yeah, I keep picturing just basements and boiler rooms full of just trolls, like Democrat hordes of trolls, just all on their computer waiting for like a sane person like you to reply to a Twitter post.
I don't know if they're basement dwelling trolls. I think some of them actually have good jobs. Some of them could be, some of them are obviously, like Antifa people, or they're paid trolls, like you said, by like George Soros and David Brock of Media Matters. And, maybe they're making a decent living. But I think there's some good, highly paid professionals out there, either government bureaucrats making 6-figure salaries like Wesley Mouch, who hate Republicans, hate capitalism. They're like, we should have more control over every government industry. The reason the financial crisis in 2008 happened was because there wasn't enough regulation of the banks and everything else, and capitalism failed, blah, 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 right? And, Bernie Madoff would have been stopped if the SEC had triple its budget.
Yeah, you're
like
right. I mean, I do talk to a lot of people that I would expect to be more with it, and you're right. It's pervasive. But I mentioned this on Lewis. I was interviewed on Lewis on Small Gold's subscriber series on Monday, and I mentioned that we have the NFL and the NBA here in America, and people's eyes are always glued to sporting events, and I equate it to the Colosseum from back in Rome. It's just like one big distraction, and all all the girls out there and ladies are keeping up with the Kardashians and stuff like that, and we've had it so good for so long that we've gotten lazy and complacent,
Yep.
and we just accept what we're spoon fed at this point. So
yep, bread and circus,
yeah.
right? You mentioned
Romans. Yeah, exactly.
Bread and circus. But a lot of people refuse to acknowledge this, that the United States, Derek, you live right outside of DC too, since I disclosed earlier we're friends in real life. The level of corruption here, and it's in the bureaucracy. Look, Trump can't even get a lot of his political appointees through. The bureaucracy is literally, not only are they leaking lots of shit to the mainstream media and risking felony charges and treason by leaking top secret or classified information to the mainstream media, but they are literally blocking him, preventing him from hiring pro-Trump people. There's tons of never-Trumpers in the bureaucracy sabotaging his policies and preventing him from even hiring his own people and bringing them into the government.
Yeah, it's a darn shame. The swamp is way bigger than Donald had expected, I think.
Oh, yeah, he disclosed that. He admitted a couple weeks ago, right, that he said the job was a lot harder than he thought it was.
Right.
But I think that's only because, the U.S. has gotten, a lot of people won't admit this. We hear Democrats like Elizabeth Warren, talk about how rich the U.S. is and how we can afford all these things. They don't understand how broke the U.S. is. Yes, we have assets, but our liabilities and debt is astronomical. So, yes, we have assets, but they don't understand a balance sheet. You're a financial guy. You could have a lot of assets and still be bankrupt.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think they just don't understand. I think the U.S. on the corruption levels, it's making it difficult to even get little things done, and that's what's pissing off Trump the most. I think he assumed he would easily be able to get pro-Trump government employees hired, but the U.S. is basically a third world banana republic now in a lot of aspects. The levels of corruption that he can't even get little things done.
Yeah.
He's wasting so much, time and energy getting little things done. Because if Trump, in the private sector, if he wanted to make big changes with his companies, he could do it very quickly. He could fire a bunch of people, he could start allocating capital, and he could turn things around very quickly. In the government sector, that's not how things work. I think most of the budget, Derek, for the government's budget is locked in for 5 years, 80% of it for the next 5 years. So for him to start, trimming, cut the budget in half, that stuff's basically impossible now.
Yeah, I've always said that, no matter who gets elected, they're going to be piloting the ship down, going down in flames. But, at least we have Donald instead of Hillary, honestly, in my opinion. I go to bed every night and I say a little prayer that I hope he's playing 5D chess.
You'll be playing 4D chess?
5D.
5D?
One more D. Yeah.
Okay, I thought I heard initially it was like 3D, and then I heard other people talking about 4D, and now it's like 5D chess. Yeah.
Yeah. Tomorrow, I might up it to 6D. So I hope he knows what he's doing. You know what I mean?
Well, he needs to start firing the people that are leaking, because I've heard a lot of people in his own administration, like his chief of staff and others, have been leaking. So he needs to get rid of them. There's a lot.
Isn't that like can't you go to prison for a long time for doing that?
If you're a Republican, yes. If you're a Democrat, apparently not. Hillary. Okay, the U.S. Espionage Act is very clear about things. If you are grossly negligent with top secret information, you don't even have to have intent for the U.S. Espionage Act to be. Right. You only have to be grossly negligent about protecting top secret information. And anyone who's seen a picture of Hillary Clinton's email server and all the other evidence, it's 100% obvious how grossly negligent she was. So,
definitely.
And that's not even counting all the other charges. So, there's
wasn't Comey's rationale that he couldn't prove intent?
Yes. So he did that speech during the election saying all the things she had done with her server and said, but she had no intent. Which is
oh my gosh.
But yeah, he didn't talk about the Espionage Act, that you don't need intent. So yes, maybe he couldn't prove intent for the other violations of criminal laws she had done, but for the Espionage Act, which is a huge felony, you don't need intent.
Yeah, I'll take anything at this point.
Yeah, well, we'll see. Now that Comey's gone, let's see who he brings in as the new FBI director. Did you hear that he was thinking of Joe Lieberman? Jesus Christ, that would be bad.
I did hear that, and I also heard that a lot of other people were kind of like bowing out too, because it is a pretty thankless job, you know? Who would want to step into that mess?
That is a good point. That is a good point. When you have, because there was a mutiny at the FBI at one point during the election. I had heard that from a couple different sources that there was a lot of people upset that had done, the investigation work on the Hillary case and were upset that charges weren't brought.
I'm sure I would be too.
Well, Derek, I enjoyed our discussion today. I want you to promote your channel. You're a smart guy. I've known you for a year now. I've been speaking with you in person and online for a year now. So I'm glad you're going to be providing more of your insight. How do our listeners find your work?
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, I just started a YouTube channel up called Markets with Bronson. So join me over there. I'll probably just upload, quick 5 or 10 minute videos once in a while just to give my take on what I see going on in the markets or what I see going on in, politics and geopolitics. And if anyone has any ideas or things they want to discuss or hear about, drop me a comment on my channel, and I'd be happy to talk about it.
Very good. And that's not Bronson Pinchot, right? That's not the guy from Balky?
No, that's correct. That's correct. Markets with Bronson.
Yes, and you kind of look like Ron Burgundy in your picture there, so.
Stay classy.
Wall Street for Main Street needs your help. YouTube stole $7,200 from Wall Street for Main Street in annualized YouTube AdWords revenues, and they kneecapped our analytics down by more than 80% across the board since September 2016 with their new censorship algorithms to stop the rapid growth of our channel. That was money we could have used to upgrade our website, pay bills, and invest in improving our content and growing our business. Our audience of loyal listeners is all over the globe and so large now that if most or all of our listeners were to commit to donating $1 to $5 each month to our Patreon account, we could easily meet our goal on Patreon. Wall Street for Main Street also accepts one-time donations on our main wallstreetformainstreet.com website. That's WALLSTFORMAINST.com website via PayPal, Gold Money, or Bitcoin. We also accept donations of physical precious metals that can be mailed to us. Thanks to all listeners who have already made a donation, and thanks in advance to any listeners who make a future donation or contribution to the growth, improvement, and success of Wall Street for Main Street.